The Canadian Bitcoiners podcast is just two guys and maybe a guest or two discussing Bitcoin, Bitcoin equities, and the related macroeconomic space. It's not meant to be financial advice, so please, if you're doing any investing after listening to our program, do your own research, do your own due diligence, and understand that any money you invest can be lost. The show is meant for entertainment purposes only, and we hope you enjoy the program. Friends and enemies, do I have a treat for you tonight? The one, the only nuclear Bitcoiner, Ryan MacLeod is here. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. Ryan, obviously you guys know him. He's been on the show, I think, twice before. This is probably his third appearance. It's either second or third appearance. I forget. Maybe more than that, actually. He's the guy to go to for all things nuclear in Bitcoin and nuclear even more broadly. Maybe it's a big topic these days in energy. It's a big topic in Bitcoin. It's a big topic in green and whatnot. Some stuff that we look with disdain on from time to time. But it's important tech. It's maybe the most important thing we've achieved as a civilization, a species in terms of energy provision. So we're going to talk about that today. But as always, before we start, the sponsors, EasyDNS, Mark and the team, the best in the business when it comes to DNS, VPS, all that good stuff. So I'll tell you a story. There was a listener to the show who sent me a DM a couple of days ago. He was trying to buy a couple of domains, as all good Bitcoiners should do. And there's a hang up, I guess, with the promo code or something. Some weird exemption or fringe case here. None other than Mark himself hopped into action, helped sort the problem out, made sure that this guy got what he needed. And now we got a happy domain owner, actually owner of multiple domains, I believe. You can't get that kind of customer service in most places, let alone, a business like EasyDNS, which has been around for more than a decade, almost 20 years now, I think, if I remember the founding date, it's like early 2000s, but Mark will have to correct me on that. You're not going to get that kind of service everywhere. And, especially not from the proprietor, founder, co-founder. On top of that, if you ever want to get, some support with what you're doing, whether it's VPS stuff, you want to do virtual private server with Mark and the team over at EasyDNS, you want to do a Bitcoin node, Nostr relay, nodeless implementation, you name it, whatever you want, you can get it done there. Host your email there. Me and Len are working on the Canadian Bitcoiners emails. Got to be pretty soon. I'm tired of using Gmail like a cuck. Got to work on that. And he's helping with all that stuff. And then, of course, if you go to CanadianBitcoiners.com, you can see what we've put together with Mark's help for the website. We post there every week, a couple of times. We have a couple of guest writers, whether it's the weekly news roundup, the weekly research stuff. I think I said on yesterday's show, some recent content from our buddy Bitcoin Scribe on payment apps, all there, all powered by EasyDNS. So if you want to use them, you should. Go to easydns.com, use our promo code CBP Media, or just tell him we sent you. Tell Mark we sent you. Hit him up on Twitter. Hit him in the chat here. He's with us most of the live streams, Monday nights, Wednesday nights, or Tuesdays, I guess, in this case. Always around, always ready to help. It's a great company. We're happy to be partnered with them. And the second company, of course, we're happy to be partnered with as well, Bull Bitcoin. So you guys know that I think on the 15th, the last day for kyc-free Bitcoin, at least for now, via the Bull Bitcoin QR code / post office method that we've been so happy with as a podcast and as a sponsor. And I know Len and I use it a bunch, and I'm sure you guys do too. So, that is ending for now, but don't forget, okay? Bull is the most mission-focused Bitcoin company in the space. You will not catch Francis in any Twitter space, podcast appearance, talking about anything but Bitcoin and driving Bitcoin forward. There is no other consideration. There is no fiat consideration. It is Bitcoin or it is death. And they may even sell a shirt with that on it. I'm not 100% sure, but nothing would surprise me. If you want to pay your bills in Bitcoin, price is up right now compared to 2 months ago, although down compared to yesterday. You can do that too. Bills is on their platform, BYLLS. You want to pay your phone bill, your property tax, whatever, they got you covered. And don't forget, okay, non-custodial, make sure you have your addresses ready. You got to control the keys on the wallet to which you send your Bitcoin when you buy. And baked in privacy, coin joins on every single outgoing transaction. You can't beat it. Use the promo code. iwantbitcoin.ca is the website. I forget what our promo code is because I've said it basically 0 times. Len always does the read, so forgive me for that. But great company. We're happy to be with them as well. I'm going to bring Ryan on. The biggest story in terms of CBP today was going to be that I am showing some guy thigh, but now it's going to be your jersey. I need to get one of these jerseys. I was at the Your Life, Your Terms event on the weekend, and Anthony DeGazin is running FinLit, this like financial literacy program for kids with his buddy Mark Mulder. Had the jersey on, that same one, I'm pretty sure. And I am more and more jealous every time I see them. So first of all, you look great. Second of all, how are you doing? Does your mood match your appearance?
I am in a very great mood right now. There's so many reasons to be excited. There's Bitcoin's exciting, nuclear power is exciting, and yeah, the jersey, I picked it up at last year's conference. I almost didn't get it, but then I was going to Minneapolis for a nuclear conference the next week, and part of the one of the events we were going to was a Twins game. So I was like, well, I need to have a ball jersey. So I picked it up, and then that's how missing out on the pizza that they had for the speakers at the conference because I got caught up talking for so long, and then that happens. And I hear that we're getting hockey jerseys this year
Yeah, that is the
because we
word.
have hockey teams this year, and it's going to be a shit show. But I have signed up to play in net for the Canadian team.
You're the goalie, dude. I was on the weekend. We were talking. Me and the Bull guys were talking, and the rumor was we couldn't get goalies. And so you're telling me you're playing goalie for the Canadian team?
I saw there was a posting by the Hodlers official that they were looking for a goalie, and I was like, well, I've got pads and skates. I haven't worn it in 13 years, but what better reason to come out of retirement? And then I can tell my parents and be like, yo, Dad, I'm playing for Team Canada. And he's gonna be like, what are you talking about? It's like, yeah, I expect I'm not the only one coming out of retirement for this one. It's
I don't know. Like I think you're a little younger than me, but I haven't played hockey since I was like in grade 8, and I have skates that I bought maybe 10 years ago. And I tell myself every year I'm going to get them sharpened, get the edges put back on them, and I just never do. And I got to be honest, it's tempting to play in that game. I'm going to be busy Thursday night now, and I'm not going to be able to play in it or even make it. But I know Brandon from Green Candle is going to be doing the play-by-play, which should be good. And I hope he finds a competent partner. I wasn't able to join him, obviously, for that either. But okay, so question for you then on the hockey front before we keep going. Who do you think is the best Canadian Olympic goalie in the last like 30, 40 years? Like, I think a lot of people are partial to Brodeur, but I think you make a case for like Cujo or Waugh or Belfour. Where do you land?
I don't know. It is hard to pick because like all the ones you listed off were ones from my era when I used to pay a lot more attention to hockey. But yeah, I haven't been paying too much to professional sports these days. But yeah, I would have to go with Brodeur. Brodeur was one of my favorites. And then like I was also a fan of Kolzig from the Germans because he was
Olaf Kolzig. I forgot about that guy.
Yeah, because that was back when like I was a big fan of the Capitals around the time that when they signed Ovechkin, and it came about from me playing online NHL because the Capitals were the shittiest team in the league, and so it was the only thing I had to do. So I just got really good with the shittiest team and played in leagues and wrecked people, and then I just became a Capitals fan out of that.
You love to see it.
I love you guys talking about NHL '94, but like I'm partial to some old school Blades of Steel. That was my jam.
Man, Blades of Steel, ice hockey, those are really the best games. If Len had any kind of sense, he would do a podcast about those. The depth of the fan club for those games is like Olympic swimming pool deep, and I would love to see something about that. Okay, so let me tell people here kind of what we're doing. You and me traded DMs a little while ago. I know we talk a little bit about nuclear on the show from time to time, and I got to be honest, we are like over our heads when it comes to sort of policy and maybe protection of quality nuclear energy programs around the world, but specifically Europe, North America. And the reason we look at those two countries more often than not is because I think that there's a real chance that whatever happens in those countries in terms of policy, both on the energy front and on the Bitcoin front, is going to drive outcomes around the rest of the world, especially the modern world. Maybe not LATAM, maybe not some of these other, on the fringe adopters, but for you and I, it's going to be a big deal. And one of the reasons, we wanted to bring you back on is because there's no one better to talk to about this, like I said in the intro. So maybe we should start with, in Canada, Ryan, what is the state of the nuclear energy picture for us? Where are we now? What should we be looking at? How did we get here? Maybe the last like 6-8 months, whenever the last time you were on.
Yeah, well, there's been, I think, several more announcements about developments with different stakeholders and provinces that want to participate in getting nuclear power. But Ontario, I think today or yesterday, sometime this week, they reached their 10-year milestone of being completely coal-free from our grid, and that is thankfully from our nuclear power fleet that we have and that's very well maintained. Currently, I think there's 3 reactors down for refurbishments, and they're cycling through. I think they'll be completely finished the entire fleet by 2030. Well, 2032 was the original plan, but now they might be adding Pickering to the list, so that's going to extend it. So, but they're gaining a lot of experience and doing these projects ahead of schedule, on budget, and it's very reassuring that there are some parties in the nuclear sector that are very competent at developing this infrastructure, because Vogel was a bit of a shit show. Like, there's plenty of reasons for that. And if anybody wants to do a deep dive on it, the Decoupled podcast has like a 3-part series that goes through very detailed on all of the shit show that building Vogel was, and all the parties
tell people
involved.
what Vogel is. I only know it a little bit because I do listen to Decoupled when I have time, but tell people a little bit about what that is, because we've never talked about it on the show.
Yeah, Vogel is a pair of nuclear reactors that were just completed in Georgia. They're the AP1000 design, but when they were started, the process started in like 2005, and there was a bit of overcommitment on the design was complete before it was done, and there was lots of engineering changes on the fly, and getting along with regulators, and then some stakeholders started to sue other stakeholders because there was like QA qualifications that weren't being met, and it was a mess. But the thing about it, though, is the job got done. The reactor's complete. They have a complete design now. They've re-established a really good supply chain to develop those reactors, and they've got the labor force. So the smart move would be to parlay that into building more of these things and not just let all of that painstaking effort go to waste after the billions of dollars that got poured into it in the many, many years waiting. And then there was also a second pair of reactors that was supposed to be built in, I think, South Carolina at the summer site. And partway through, they just got completely scrapped because it was just the cost overruns, and the stakeholders involved in that one were not willing to completely follow through on it. So it is actually miraculous that Vogel even got completed as it did. But now that it is online, it is an impressive milestone they finally reached. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about building more, and then there's a lot of interest in SMRs all over the place for various sizes, different heat outputs, different fuel types, different coolant types that can be used to apply to non-electrical applications for nuclear, and have different sized grids and off-grid applications. And yeah, nuclear wants to reach into a lot more markets where the traditional large reactors aren't really a good fit. But there is a huge resurgence in a lot of interest in these large reactors. Like, even at the COP conference, there was 23 or 24 countries signed on to a pledge to triple global nuclear capacity by 2050. But one thing that was notable is, on that pledge, the 3 countries that are actively building the most nuclear power at the moment, India, China, and Russia, were not actually part of that pledge, which is kind of they're just building. They don't need to make these grandstanding pledges about it. And but they've also been like, they're like the black sheep of the international community. They don't get the to stand in all the pictures with everyone else these days.
No, exactly. So one thing you mentioned there that I want to, it's a thread I want to pull on, and we talked about it a bit in the past on, in different silos. This idea that we're doing things now and displaying, competency. And I think you use the word practice. We're getting reps basically in building these things. One of the concerns I have about infrastructure in Canada, and I'm sure the Americans share it, and I'm sure there's European countries that share the same concern. I don't think there's a lot of people who understand how these systems truly work and what they're built on. And what we've seen in the last, year, especially when it comes to stuff like, roads, bridges, electrical infrastructure, airplanes, for God's sake, you're operating what looks to be like on a pretty significant technical deficit. And it's just, they're building things on old systems because they don't know how the old systems work. And you wind up causing new problems for yourself and having these unreliable finished products, right? Whether it's a power plant, a bridge, a plane, a car, whatever. Is it fair to say, and I'm not really a person that's worried about this, but I know people who are, is it fair to say that nuclear, from the standpoint of whether it's going to win out long-term, is it like ordained is too strong a phrase, but like, it seems to me almost a guarantee, because we're just not building a lot of other power sources or power plants or energy output from scratch anymore, except this stuff. The refurbishing process is pretty significant from what I understand. Is there opportunities for guys to quote unquote get reps in other, power silos? There's got to be a better way to phrase that, but it seems to me like nuclear is the one that everyone is building and working on. And this is the one that's going to naturally take over because that's where we're going to have the new generation of expertise, not this older stuff.
Well, it's definitely become the attractive, shiny new object these days because everyone's as the strategies of the last decades or so appear to be showing cracks and not manifesting as they were promised, and like noticing that like there's a lot of deals that we're planning to build solar and wind all over the place are falling through because they need guarantees of higher rates in order to be profitable. So they're just not getting built, which is preferable to them being built with capital that they were given freely and terribly misallocated, and then building these things and then having to survive purely off of subsidies, and then that creates distortions in these grids. And like, yeah, like that's another, like what you said, like it's just, we're almost sabotaging ourselves. Like getting in reps is important for like building these things, but we're actively making it difficult to develop like hydrocarbon infrastructure these days. Like we're deterring intellectual capital from entering these sectors because they're seeing policy pointing in a direction that we're trying to reduce the amount of these vital industries that we have supporting like our very high-tech society. But it is reassuring to see that we're finally coming back around to nuclear, because like I don't have, like, I'm not completely opposed to the wind and solar, but the way that they were just being mass applied everywhere that they could find the land to build them, and then damn the ability to actually like even connect them to the grid in a reasonable time frame, don't consider the fact that like if you're building a lot of these all at the same time, then they're all starting to cannibalize each other's infrastructure when they causes grid congestion, it causes negative prices, and just all kinds of negative consequences. And like a good book to read on this is Meredith Angwin's Shorting the Grid. She goes into great detail, like explaining how like subsidies and a lot of these incentives create distortions that then have negative consequences for our baseload generators. And then instead of building and continuing to develop this infrastructure, because it's all just like one giant machine that has different nodes connected to each other, from generation to transmission to consumers at the end. Like it's got a lot of moving parts that needs a lot of competent individuals that have had the time to develop those expertise in these markets. But we had a good chunk of time where people were attracted to like the tech industry, to finance industry. People want to just be online stars nowadays. It's just the drain away from trades and engineering and all of the talents that we need to maintain a high-tech society don't seem to be manifesting as we were assured that they would be. But then the way that we see it, like you just start seeing the incentives and it all makes sense. It's just people aren't motivated to do the hard work these days because fiat just creates the easy path for everyone.
Yeah, it's
to game
like,
it.
Yeah, it's clearly a problem. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on why there's been such a significant swing of the pendulum toward nuclear. You mentioned the COP conference, 23 or 24, I can't remember what you said, member states signing a declaration is significant. It is a little bit of a grandstand dog and pony show type thing, but that's what those conferences are for. So it's significant in that regard. And then you mentioned also China, Russia, India, which I think is, 30%, 40% of the entire world's population. It's some significant number. They're all building nuclear at a rate that's basically unprecedented and much greater than anywhere else in the civilized world. What changed? You mentioned that we went from this like determination, tunnel vision, building wind and solar everywhere, all the time, at any cost, for any grid purpose, for any need set, no matter what. There was no tailoring. It just was a plug and play solution. It was popular in politics, popular in media, and popular for energy activists as well. And suddenly that's flipped. What happened? What was the big difference? Because as far as I can tell, short of what's going on in parts of Europe, this sort of energy / economic suicide at the hands of solar panels and wind turbines, I don't know what else changed. It's a lot of the same people in power since 2 years ago. A lot of the same activist groups are prominent. What was the big shift in your view? Was there one? What happened?
I don't know. It feels like something around 2021 is when the shift really started to happen, because I only started to really pay attention early in 21 because it was on the tail end of me figuring out Bitcoin. And then I was just like, well, I'm in the nuclear industry and I can totally figure out how this applies. And then I went deep down both rabbit holes at the same time. And yeah, there was like just the public sentiment and the policy sentiment was definitely unfavorable towards nuclear. And then around the COP conference in 2021, something really changed, and it seemed like more people within the broader public that were starting to feel the pain and observe these policies actually manifesting, because like there's a lag effect to all this. Like you build these things and you build them all over the place, and then you don't start seeing the diminishing returns until they're all over the place, and then you start seeing congestion in your getting your transmission infrastructure connected so that all these things can actually get connected to the grid. And then when they are connected to the grid, they cause all kinds of chaos because they generate power not synchronously with the frequency of all of the spinning generation that's on the grids from the hydro and the nuclear and the thermal sources, because they have to maintain a very specific frequency. It's basically like a heartbeat. So they have to have extra infrastructure in place that brings the wind and solar infrastructure in line. So it's great that you can produce free electricity on the spot at the site. And if you can consume it on site, that is great because yeah, you have minimal costs. But as soon as you need to put that on the grid and deliver it to customers, there's all kinds of extraneous costs that get added into it. But I think that was only really possible in the policy environment where the zero interest rate policy was reigning the day, and these were one of the great beneficiaries of those policies. They were getting very low interest loans. They were getting the ITC, I forget what that one stands for, the infrastructure tax credit, the production tax credit, and just all these things. And then so like they're profitable when the grid price is like negative 10 cents and they're still making money. And then you've got your nuclear generators, like they've got to like beg to be like, well, can we at least like get guaranteed like 3-4 cents a kilowatt hour? Like that's what we have in Ontario. Like our Bruce and the other OPG reactors, they get paid like a flat, I think it's like 7-8 cents kilowatt hour. In Canadian, that's I don't know, probably like 6 cents American.
Yeah.
But maybe even 5 cents, because yeah, we're not doing
not
well.
Going well.
Like,
Yeah.
like I love seeing it, looking at the all-time high in Canadian versus the where it's at in American, and like we're 10,000, almost like $15,000 more than where we were the last time that it was at this price in American. It's ridiculous. And our dollar is such a shit coin. Like I can't use it anywhere. But it's just it makes it hard for the nuclear baseload generators to make the return on their investment and recover their capital costs when they are constantly having to either pay the grid to take their power or not earn anything from it all by curtailing. So like a lot of what Ontario does is we're running at full capacity, we'll export to the northern states, but then the northern states became kind of dependent on those imports, and then they decided that we can just shut down our nuclear reactors and they'll just be replaced magically by windmills and solar panels.
Incredible.
And as we see, Indian Point has been predominantly replaced by natural gas and imports. Palisades was replaced by natural gas and imports. Pilgrim, natural gas and imports. These are just like 4 or 5 reactors just all along the Northeast corridor that this was completely went against the conventional wisdom at the time that reality did not match what their fantasy was of how it was going to play out. And now there's a frantic effort to restart Palisades reactor in Michigan, and I would not be surprised if that prompts others to possibly look at the possibility of restarting some of those other reactors that were shut down. I had heard something about there's some reactors in New Jersey that were considered for being shut down within like 3 or 4 years that are now being looked at for life extensions and refurbishments.
Go figure.
Like even Gentilly 2 in Quebec, there's been rumors that there's serious talk about refurbishing that, which would be very interesting, and that would be a really good to thumb in the eye of our environment minister, because he was one of the lead activists petitioning to get it shut down in the first place.
What is
But,
the rationale for someone like Minister Guilbeault to want to shut down nuclear? You know, politics aside, I don't necessarily think that even a common sort of person with rudimentary understanding of energy policy or energy generation, you know, if you realize or know or have done a little bit of research, you're pretty quickly put at bay when it comes to common concerns. Like the waste is not as dangerous as you think, and the half life is not as significant as you might believe. And there's never really been a death from a nuclear, you know, plant accident outside of Chernobyl, maybe depending on how you qualify some of those deaths. Um, and so, like, what reason does the federal government have to oppose these things apart from politics and maybe, you know, a decades old blood feud with a, you know, energy generation method? I just don't see it, and I can't imagine you do either. But you must know what they're saying at least. What are they saying?
well, a lot of it's ideological driven and fear, obviously, just from an older generation that was exposed to a lot more scary narratives about nuclear and the possibilities, and they lived through those events that were like, yeah, like they were tragic events, but they were definitely overhyped and sensationalized relative to the actual results of any exposure to the public. But
Mm-hmm.
like there's yeah like that there was more fatalities in that bridge accident the other day than
Yeah.
like Fukushima and
Yeah.
Chernobyl. So it's like it happened. Like industrial accidents happen. Radiation is just another industrial hazard that we know how to manage, we know how to detect, and we know how to control it. It's really not that big of a deal, but because it's very poorly understood by the broader public, it can be scary, especially since most of their exposure to it is, yeah, popular culture, Simpsons, and
Yeah.
like, yeah, like
Isn't that something,
it
Ryan? Like you would never do this anywhere else. We don't, maybe the only other place we see this sort of spectacular picture of the threat of a certain kind of technology is like artificial intelligence, right? Everyone thinks of iRobot instead of just thinking about a chat window that spits out a piss poor grade 10 essay, Wikipedia style, you know, like, but really there's no, like the danger is not as bad as everyone thinks. And so I guess maybe the next logical question in terms of like, you know, why the government opposes it's ideological, I think in a lot of cases. Who's leading the charge for refurbishing in these instances you mentioned, like the Quebec? I forget the name of the plant there, but it's interesting because there was really no voices outside of nuclear advocates years ago that were pushing for this, but that wasn't enough then. So there must have been someone added to the pool of, you know, voices. Who's in the chorus now? Who's making all the noise?
It's probably mostly coming from the utilities because they have been screaming that what is being done to the grid that they are trying to manage is making
Mm.
their job incredibly difficult and challenging. And like I was everyone was excited about the eclipse yesterday, and I was more interested in seeing what the power market charts were going to look like, and just seeing that dip in the middle of the day of solar just disappearing and the natural gas ramping up like 7-8 gigawatts for 10 minutes. Like,
God, you are for sure on the spectrum, buddy. You know, that's a dead giveaway there. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I talk with my hands, but no, it was just it's just so much interesting things going on in our power systems right now, and we have intentionally started to sabotage them with the policy that's being forced upon them. Like,
You're saying we, like in Canada, you're
well,
seeing this too. Everyone knows Europe,
well,
but like in
like
Canada,
it's
you're seeing
everywhere.
this?
Europe, it's not as bad and prevalent in Canada because we at least like listen to our utilities when they say like, no, like we need to keep the coal online, we need to keep the gas online, we need to keep the nuclear online, we need to extend it for multiple generations so that we like always have these assets available to us. Like it's switching to a completely renewable grid like requires a completely reconfiguration. Like the entire thing has to be re rebuilt. Like it's already so much of like a patchwork of being put together, and it's done in a way that we know that works with, so that everything rotates and syncs with each other at the same frequency so that it can all communicate across like these vast distances. And then you start throwing in these other sources that are essentially like communicating with this network in a way that doesn't align with what it's familiar with, and it starts to throw it out of whack, and it starts to make these men's jobs incredibly more difficult. And then they start looking into these things like, oh, well, we can institute these programs where we will incentivize the public to lessen their energy usage. And it's like, yes, I hear you saying that I'm going to have fun being poor. Yes, we're going to use less energy.
Have fun being cold. Yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah, oh yes, like they've gotten lucky in Europe these last few years that winter's been kind of mild, because if they got a cold winter, they were not going to do well. And like, it's like we're putting people in a position where they have to choose if they want to eat in a home in the cold or the dark. Like one of those pieces is like balancing all of that nowadays is like, in affording life is incredibly challenging for a lot of people. And then yeah, you jacking around something that we've relied upon, uh, like these energy systems for so long, and yeah, now people don't know how to cope with it, and it's going to be worse for developed countries. Like watching what's happened in South Africa. It's like,
Mhm.
I heard the concept of like it's of being a fourth world country, a country that had a developed infrastructure that went in reverse, because now you've got all this other infrastructure that was built second and third layers on top
Yeah.
of your base power infrastructure. And now like I'm hearing things about that they're not able to afford to import natural gas, so they're having to shut down some of
It's
their
just
large
ridiculous.
power plants, and they're having to ration, they're having rolling blackouts. They're like they will say will only last a short period of time, but then they'll just extend indefinitely, and you can't predict your life around that. You can't run a business on that. You can't even like keep a freezer full of meat on that. Like that changes people's lives in a dramatic way. And you put people that have, like, when cities have developed with millions of people, if that reliability leg gets kicked out of their energy systems, like it'll be Mad Max pretty damn quick.
This is so true, right? People don't realize, I live in Hamilton, Dundas, whatever. People call it different things. But one of the things I see now where I am, and I hear it as well, actually, there's a power station not too far from where I am. And, you'd be surprised how often one of those transformers blows. It's like once every, I don't know, couple months, maybe in the summertime. And, I said to my wife a little while ago, and you're making the same point, and it's something that's been floating around for a long time. I don't know who originally said it. You're basically only about 9 meals away from having to kill somebody for food. And in Canada, especially in places like Hamilton, Toronto, Oakville, Burlington, like the GTA, GTHA, I would imagine Quebec is like this. I would imagine some parts of BC or Alberta are like this. You're in a locale where rolling blackouts during heat waves is like the expectation. There's going to be a power outage or a brownout or something at some point. If everyone is running the air conditioner, be ready for it. Make sure your fridge is closed. Make sure. And like, I realize it's not like dire, but at the same time, I can't figure out why the provinces and the federal government as well, and perhaps also the people who vote for, these ruling parties, these governing parties, do they not realize that we're always a little closer than they think? Do they not consider this? I've always wondered that. It's not really a question for you. I'm just thinking out loud. That this idea that we're so close to, like you said, Mad Max. And if we keep going down this road where we're replacing quality, reliable baseload with dependence on wind, solar, and other stuff that, even in the best of times just isn't as efficient as hydrocarbons, for example, you're asking for trouble. Is there a push from the nuclear side of things to say, look, we're already at a point where the grid is, unreliable in the traditional model. If we start adding these novel sources, we're going to add problems, and the problems are going to be harder to get out of. Like you mentioned there, a place like South Africa, fourth world. When you said, these guys had a system that worked, they went backwards, and now they're trying to, that sounds a lot like some places here too. Don't you think?
It's definitely getting precarious. Like there was energy warnings in Alberta just the other day, and like this is the spring
For
when that,
what? For what? Like
like
for heat?
I don't really know what it was, but like they were saying that there was strain on the grid, and they were
Oh,
suggesting that people reduce their power usage. And it's happening more and more often in places that were once reliable and affordable, and it's not pretty. Like it. it seems like we're moving to, like, everything moved to this just-in-time delivery mindset. So we're
Yeah.
kind of getting to do that with our electricity. It's just like, oh, we don't need reserves. We'll just use batteries, and we don't need like to have excess capacity. We'll just build all these solar panels, and we'll just fill the batteries, and then that will be our reserves. But like, we need to have dispatchable power that we can just access whenever we need it. Like, that's what the gas is for. That's where coal and like really serves a really valuable role to our grids. And like, then there's other stuff that's associated with these, with with coal and gas that are beyond just their electricity and heat usages. Like, they're used as feedstock for countless other like chemical production processes. So
Hmm.
like that's that's probably what's going to happen as they get displaced, as we put more nuclear into the grid, displacing the need for coal and gas, because that's where nuclear really shines above the wind and solar, because you can't just drop windmills and solar panels of equivalent volume where a coal plant was or a natural gas plant. Like, they're kind of trying to do that with one of the coal plants down in like near Niagara, and the capacity is nowhere near, yeah, Nanticoke. That's the one.
Okay.
What it used to be, like, that was the largest coal plant in the world for a good chunk of time.
Really?
Yeah, and it was the
Wow.
last one that was retired in Ontario before we completely went off coal. And yeah, so the amount of wind and solar that's replacing it is like a pittance compared to the grid interconnection access that has there, that it could be making available to the grid. So that is where they want to do like a nuclear to coal transition, because you can just take the old power plant out, you can retire it and decommission it, and then you can install a nuclear power plant of roughly the same capacity, or multiple modules, depending on how you want to do it with the next generation of small modular reactors. And then you already have access to that legacy power transmission infrastructure, so you can just feed right into that with minimal development. Whereas a lot of these wind and solar projects, they're having to be built further and further afield, further from their customer base, like further from the prime land where they would be
Sure.
best suitable. And then that requires more transmission to bring it where it needs to be. And then it also starts putting a strain on the supply chain for transformers, which then starts to affect a lot of the other customers for this technology that require those to get online. So it takes, like, I think like 18 months lead time for a transformer in like the best of times, but sometimes now they're saying like as much as 2 to 3 years is a reasonable time to wait for one
For
of
a
these things.
transformer. Come
Yeah,
on.
like depending on where you are, like,
Oh
yeah,
my God. Oh man.
like you
I
gotta
mean,
you
you
gotta know
make
people, and like interconnections are taking years. Like, they're saying like, oh, that's great, you've got 100 megawatts worth of wind in northern UK, but it's going to be 5 years before you can connect it to the grid. It's like there's it was such a poor planning ahead, because they didn't consider all of these second order effects of the rest of the supply chain that they're going to need to connect all of this shit together.
yeah.
But it's like, I think like in this potential, like if we do go to like a breakdown of society in Mad Max, like the the in the dark ages, like the windmills and the solar panels will just be this broken legacy, like the Roman aqueducts
They're
throughout Europe.
relics. They're relics,
Yeah,
man.
they'll
I,
just
I
be
don't
like,
know.
yeah.
Have you ever played Horizon? I mean, this is a bit far afoot, but Horizon is like a future, far future game. And to your point, there's entire subsections of the map where it's just relics of piss poor power generation, solar, wind. You're onto something there. You're not the only one thinking that.
Well, like, we're building so much of it. And then one of the things that I learned recently is, because the tax credits only endure for 10 years, but the product themselves, the windmill, has a lifetime expectancy of 10 to like 25 years or so. They're incentivized to either replace them after 10 years so that restarts the subsidy clock,
Hmm.
or to transfer ownership to a local owner so that they are no longer, so that someone else is holding the bag for end of life maintenance. Like, and people are starting to catch on to this. Like, there
I
was
guess so.
actually a
Yeah.
major lawsuit. I think it was like the Osage tribe. Robert Bryce has a really good piece on this, but I think there's 70, 80 or so windmills that they have to tear down because they built them in such rights of the landowners, the tribe, that they wanted access to the resources they have on that land, but those windmills got built there, so they won a court battle to get them taken away so that they can do what they want. And it's interesting because that's also the same tribe that was portrayed in that recent Scorsese movie, the Killers of the Flower Moon.
Oh,
Which
really? That's
I haven't watched it
yeah.
yet, but I heard it's really good.
Well, if I ever have 4 hours to kill, maybe I'll sit down and watch it.
Oh God, I
It-
know those
the-
Scorsese movies. They're so good, but they're God.
Yeah, I know it's a mission. It's a mission. Okay, so you've done a killer job here, giving us some color context to how we got here, where we are. I want to talk a little bit about what's coming next, and Canada is. I think this is how I think about it anyway. And I'm not an expert in nuclear, but are we not famous, or have we not become relatively notable for our CANDU tech, our reactor tech? I know we have a few of these sort of Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4 reactors, maybe. Are we building those still? When you're talking about refurbishing plants, is this what we're doing? Are we advancing the tech in some of these plants? What's on the horizon as far as the sort of Gen 3, 4, 5, whatever, CANDU style, I think you'd call it, reactor? And then what about SMRs? Last time we spoke for sure, there was some discussion about SMRs, but this has really become a popular thing to talk about. Eric Townsend on Macro Voices did an entire series on YouTube about nuclear energy, and there's a huge swath of that series on SMRs. That guy's a big voice in economics and certainly in the podcast space. So your expertise silos in the spotlight here. So what are we doing? What's next for us and for sort of nuclear more broadly? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, not gonna lie, like there's definitely a lot of hopium on the SMR front. Like not every design's gonna make it to the market and get to its mature commercialized state. So there's a lot of competition to find the right markets and stakeholders and get policy aligned in various ways and get first to the market. So there's going to be a lot of failures, but that's how we move forward. We throw as many of them at the wall and we see what can actually provide value for us. On the can-do front, yeah, the refurbishments are going to be upgrading basically the internal components of the entire reactor fleet. I think 18 in total to be of the most modern can-do design. And then there was another announcement that Bruce is expanding with a third site of they want to do a set of 4 for a total of 5 gigawatts. I don't know exactly what reactor they are planning to do yet. It's still out for tender. There was a new CANDU design proposed at a recent nuclear conference called the Monarch. I don't know the exact details if it still uses natural uranium like the traditional CANDU reactors, because that is one of its unique selling points, is that the uranium fuel does not need to be enriched, so that makes it a lot easier to get around a lot of the
Oh,
protectiveness that the Americans have over letting
I
other
like it.
countries
I
access
like
to
it.
enrichment. But there is also like a very strong movement with the Western nations like Japan and France and America and Canada and a few of the Scandinavian countries that have nuclear to support uh, fuel development to untangle that supply chain as much as they can from the Russian sources, because they let themselves become incredibly dependent on Russia for enriched fuel because they did an amazing job at it for
Right.
many decades. They developed the infrastructure and they were good at it. So there wasn't as much impetus to develop those capabilities elsewhere. So like it exists in a few places, but not as robustly as what is being called for and is expected of with the nuclear sector having so much more like demand for fuel in the coming future. Like there was just an announcement that for Romania that they have 2 incomplete CANDU reactors that were started in the early 2000s that they just received financing for. Like they had 2 operating CANDU
How does
reactors.
happen? Tell me how this happens. That's
Uh,
25 years ago. How does that? I don't
yeah, well,
get
I
that.
think it was related to the Ceausescu government, that it was started under them, and then after that was deposed, there wasn't enough financing to keep the program going. So they had completed 2, I think like 10 years earlier, and then they were going to build 2 more, and
Hmm.
they had just barely prepared the sites, and then they didn't have the financing fell through for obvious reasons when a dictator gets deposed,
Sure.
and And yeah, so they haven't pursued that for 20 something years. And yeah, just recently there was an announcement that they're going to finance the completion of those reactors. Another notable one is that El Salvador has been talking about developing nuclear reactor. They're talking with a thorium-based reactor company. I'm not as familiar with the thorium supply chain and that type of reactor, but it does have a lot of promise to it, and it's going to take a lot more development to get the thorium supply chains developed because it requires a different preparation process to make it usable as fuel in a nuclear reactor than uranium does. Um, Another interesting one is that Serbia was just at a conference and they announced that they're looking into nuclear power. They traditionally had not. Like Poland has been talking lots about nuclear power, but the Serbian one I find interesting because I actually had an opportunity to meet Prince Philip when I was in El Salvador for an adopting Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
so like obviously I'm just like, so has any consideration about nuclear power for Serbia?
Nice to
And
meet
then
you, by the
yeah,
way.
and yeah, you need nuclear power. Well, I just started asking him. I was like, so what's the power mix on your grid? And he's like, coal and gas probably. I was like, you need some nuclear. And then we had a good conversation. And then 2 years later, Serbia's getting nuclear power. So I like to think that I had a little bit of nudge on that. So I don't know, like, but I'm starting to meet some interesting people and connect some really interesting parties together to get some work done. Like I went to the conference in Ghana, the African Bitcoin conference in December. And I invited a friend of mine that I met through nuclear advocacy, and he's from Nigeria, and he's a nuclear engineer. So he's really smart. He's got a lot of familiarity with the electrical system. So I brought him to a Bitcoin conference, and I introduced him to the gridless guys. I introduced him to the guys from the Virunga project.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, he got bitten by the mining bug hard. 3 months later, he calls me. He's like, "Yo, I've got this mining site. It's basically got free electricity because there's a huge oil plant that has way more power than they know what to do with, and there's flares, and yeah, we just need the right people to start connecting these dots." And I'm just like, all right, I know some people. And then yeah, in no time, like he's already got another team, the Trojan mining team that's out in Nigeria already. They're looking at investing in helping develop this project. Another guy that reached out through the oil and gas and Bitcoin Telegram group, just like, yeah, I'd love to get in on this project. So we're going to start seeing a lot more Bitcoin mining in Nigeria now because I think they just passed a policy that gives a lot more autonomy to local jurisdictions to determine their own like local energy mixes and their own energy needs. So it's going to be less central control and more distributed. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops, especially with like little projects like this popping up everywhere. That's going to make a lot more use of that stranded power that they have everywhere that just doesn't have great infrastructure to deliver it very far beyond where it's generated. So they have a great opportunity to tap into a lot of resources there.
Do you think nuclear, I mean, this is a big question, but in sort of my limited understanding of the energy sector, everything I see tells me that nuclear at some point, should replace or get close to replacing a vast, vast majority of other energy sources, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's the renewables or the intermittents. Do you share that view? Because I just think it's, I don't know. Maybe it's not inevitable, but should we really be deploying resources to other energy research at this moment as the population continues to expand more and more quickly, as the needs of that population continues to expand more and more quickly, as the third world tries to industrialize, and we basically, scoff at the idea that they're using oil and gas the way we did? Doesn't it make sense that we should just be pouring all our resources, as far as, like you mentioned, like intellectual capital, into this sector? Or am I just missing something there?
I would love to see that, but I would love to see it just more equitable, like less of these like biased policies that favor one source over another and give them unfair advantages that make it complicated when you can only earn revenue by selling power to the grid, and then someone else is making revenue by milking like policy and lobbying and getting a better
Mm-hmm.
favorable seat at the subsidy trough. Like it becomes very unbalanced because then you're focused on storytelling and getting your narrative out there, and then it starts creating this animosity where if you start getting even a little bit of a seat at that trough, then the other pigs at the trough start looking at you like, who the fuck's this guy eating my lunch? And then that's sort of like the sentiment that's going on right now. Like, as nuclear power got like a little token piece of the production tax credit, and like the wind and solar people are like, how dare they? I was like I would rather just none of it and like compete on the merit and actually like impress investors with a business case that you can return their investment and then keep going and build on that investment. But like, that's not the world we live in, because everything is about who can tell a better story to the people that play the cantillionaire game.
Yeah. We have an election coming up here in about a year. Maybe a year, maybe a little less. Do you have a view on, I know no one really knows. Do you have a view on the differences between the two Canadian parties, the Libs and the Cons, in terms of their energy policies? I think that there's, a huge contingent of Bitcoiners who is in this kind of, vote harder daddy camp. I think I'm in that camp. I don't know if you are. I'd imagine you are, actually. Only because we're in a couple of group chats together. But the thing I would just ask you is, like, does the vote, does the party, does the banner matter to the energy outcome, or are they both sort of equally villainizing these nuclear facilities, the nuclear research, the nuclear industry, in this unfair way?
Well, in the Liberals, truthfully, it's only really Guilbeault. He's the only one that's kind of really hardline against nuclear, but he's even been forced in a few public appearances to talk at least like, oh well, it's necessary. He doesn't he does the lukewarm thing. He's not very enthusiastic about it, but he says what he has to say to appease the people in the caucus or whatever. But there's apparently, like, the Liberals, they're very much on board with nuclear power. Like, they're definitely kneecapping the oil and gas sector wherever they can, but whatever. They've got these grand fantasies about hydrogen and like shipping it across the seas after producing it with our windmills, because Germany doesn't want hydrogen produced with nuclear power because they're a total basket case. And then on the other side, so yeah, liberals are definitely positive on nuclear power. Like, the provinces for the most part are really positive on nuclear power. Like, Ontario and New Brunswick are the two provinces that have nuclear. Quebec formerly had nuclear and they're kind of lukewarm about getting back into it. Alberta and Saskatchewan have signed on. They want to get in on nuclear power as well. They want to deploy nuclear reactors out throughout the oil sands. They want to deploy them kind of in
reactors in the oil sands, really? Okay.
Well, because the other application is they can put out pretty high heat too. So if you're able to output like 900 degrees Celsius steam and heat, you can do that for like the hydrocarbon cracking. So you can actually do the refining of the oil and gas and whatnot with the power generated from a nuclear reactor, instead of traditionally with the oil and gas that they're producing on site, so that more of that can be exported to the other markets that need it more than we do, and we can make a lot of profit off of that, because it sounds like there's a lot of nations that would really love Canada to expand our gas exports, but every time they keep getting shut down by our great leader.
Story every day.
and then but then on the other side, the Conservatives, they're also trying. They're like, Pierre's been making a few overtures that he's like, if Trudeau's going to be on nuclear, I'm going to be even more nuclear. So traditionally, like, Conservatives haven't really been like super into nuclear, because the period when Harper was in office, there was a bit of stagnation and in like hiring and whatnot in the sector, but it did come back and it reinvigorated. But that was also kind of coincided with what happened in Fukushima, and so there was a lot of downturn in the sector. So it was a weird tough time, and hopefully it doesn't happen again. But there are actually people out there that would love to give the old I told you so if something did happen, which is it's frustrating dealing with people that actually like think like that. Like, that's very negative for the future of humanity if we aren't successful with these technologies. But then they also assume that, like, we haven't learned. Like, there was someone had asked a question recently, like, oh, how do we prevent another Chernobyl from happening? It's like, well, we don't build 60-year-old reactor designs that were shitty in the first place.
And let communist regimes manage them, and skimp on service, skimp on training, skimp on everything the way that communist regimes do. I mean, it's not that hard to figure that out, I don't think.
Yeah. And then, like, even what happened in Japan with Fukushima, like, they they were warned it was a risk and it happened, and now they've made sure that that's not going to happen again. They've built walls around those reactors, like big 20-meter tall, 3-meter thick fortress walls and now they've got floating platforms for their backup generators. So
Hmm.
if if another event like that tsunami were to happen, the reactor sites would probably be the safest locations on the island. So they're prepared and they're very eager to get their reactor fleet back online. Like every other day, there's an announcement that they're close. There's another one coming back online within like the next few weeks. So they're going to start putting also a lot more demand on the uranium markets. And like I don't know if you see the uranium charts, but it
Oh,
was
I've
a bull
seen them.
market for a long time, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, things are very exciting.
Yeah, I would say now we can't let you go without asking you about your views on sort of energy, Bitcoin, maybe some policy stuff. I know we traded DMs about this stuff in Europe where they're really going after energy use as far as mining. The States, rather bluntly, not long ago, reminding everybody that they're anti-Bitcoin mining, proposing this 30% excise tax. What do you see as far as the landscape for energy use related to Bitcoin mining? Is this something you've spent some time on, something you think about often, or do you just view this as a predetermined outcome? We're going to win at some point. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Yeah, well, you can only really ban yourself from using Bitcoin. Like, it's going to keep proliferating outside of the walled garden that you put yourself in. So if Europe wants to cut themselves off from this bountiful technology that can make their existing power infrastructure more robust and more reliable and create the incentive to build more and expand it, like that's their prerogative. And yeah, often pain is a great teacher. And I'd hate to see countries go through like a mandibles type of scenario, but some of them very may well, and we here in Canada might possibly see an outcome similar to that story. I really don't want it, but like reading through it, it's just like, yeah, it feels really, you can relate to these characters that when shit goes sideways like that. Like my favorite part of the story was when the college professor uncle gets his paycheck, gets his back pay from several years before, but nominally it looks like it's a lot of money, and then he goes to the
Yeah.
grocery store, packs his cart, and then people are like, who's this guy? And then, yeah, and then very quickly smartens up after getting mugged, and yeah, not spoil too much, but they catch on pretty quick that it's that things went sideways and they weren't paying attention because they were trapped in this worldview that kind of impeded them from actually like seeing what was really going on. Like that's one of these cool things about seeing the world through Bitcoin is you can see a more positive mentality in the world. Like there
Yeah.
is a lot more potential. Like it is like you can view the different operating systems from each other almost. Like yeah, you see the Keynesian world, you put on the Bitcoin lens, and like yeah, once you start contrasting it from outside of the system, all of the cracks and the flaws start becoming very apparent. But getting others to come on board and see what we see is incredibly challenging because they are heavily invested in the world as it works in the way that they understand it, and challenging that worldview requires a significant amount of mental work to yeah just update yourself and update
Yeah.
what yeah so
There's an
it's
admission, there's like an inherent admission that you were wrong about a lot. And that's difficult to do for a lot of people in the best case. Ryan, you've been great as always, man. We're coming up on an hour. I just want to maybe finish with one last question. The Montreal conference, you're playing hockey. You're on a panel, I believe, as well. Are you not?
probably at least one panel talking about the relationship energy and Bitcoin and future grids and microgrids, and I'm not sure exactly who I'm going to be on the panel with, but it's yeah very likely that I'll be speaking with someone that Dan Carlin introduced me to recently from Hydro Quebec. So I'm looking forward to that one because he's very familiar with uh, with grid and demand response programs, and because Quebec actually has a demand response program that the miners are actually very heavily participating in,
Yeah. Yeah.
similar to Texas. So I was not aware of how extensive that actually was. Like I knew there was plenty of miners in Quebec, and they had the moratorium, but they yeah, they're apparently serving quite a positive role on their grid, and he's working to shift that narrative from the inside. So I'm supporting his work as much as I can from connecting him with other people that I know, and we're probably going to have a pretty good talk about the future that we can build if these trends that we are all kind of tapped into can continue to manifest themselves. And did you hear Bob say when he was talking with Len the other day that they're making a 10 terahash chip
Yeah.
that they're going to put together into a machine that's going to take like 10 kilowatts?
That guy
That,
is like,
holy
he's
crap.
great. He's great.
The absolute power density that those machines are going to have is insane.
Yeah.
And
This is like, it's really futuristic kind of. I mean, I don't know enough to say how realistic that is. How realistic is that? Is that legit? Is that like something that's actually going to get done?
I don't know. He's got the domain experience and expertise, and he says he's got like one of the top-notch chip guys in the world working with him on this. So we will wait and see. I
God
hope
bless
it
him.
manifests into something awesome. But like, it sounds like they want to make all these machines just out of the box. You'll just be able to plug them in, and they'll just synchronize with whatever variables you want, whether it's temperature, the grid, the prices. And yeah, they'll have to a lot less of this kludgy aftermarket firmware stuff that they're working with right now, where they've got to rig everything up, and everybody's got their own like proprietary black box that they use to sync with the grids, and then
Different app for everything.
Somebody makes something that's too similar, and then they start like suing each other about this stuff, and it was getting silly there for a little while, because it's like, no, you're all coming to the same conclusion from your own unique paths, and it's just it made sense that we're. Yeah,
it sounds about right, eh?
Yeah, you've got an awesome load, and it's got a very important role to play in the future of our power systems.
I'm looking forward a lot to your talk. I'm glad you previewed it. Now, as always, with the guests here, tell people before we leave where they can find you, what you're working on, and if there's anything else you want to plug, books, articles, good stuff as far as resources. Floor's all yours, buddy.
Yeah. Nuclear Bitcoiner, it's in the name there, on X, on the Nostr, whichever Nostr app you prefer on that. I won't read out my NPub, but a few podcasts that I like to keep up on nuclear stuff. As Decoupled was mentioned earlier, Titans of Nuclear is another good one. They've actually been doing a series recently specifically about data centers, and actually that's one gripe that I want to mention is that they only started to really talking excitedly about data centers and nuclear power after Amazon bought the data center that TeraWolf and Cumulus Coin had already started building. They like it seems like I've been poking around, and it seems like the only person that has any awareness of this is Mark Nelson. Like, he's great on this topic. But everyone else
Mark Nelson is Mark Nelson. People who don't know is Energy Bance on Twitter, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he's a great follow. Actually, he's gonna be on a Twitter Space Thursday morning with that we do. I was at the Daily Bitcoin Show or something.
Nice,
but definitely worth checking out. He's going to be there. But it's everyone. It's like they're talking about it as if like, well, this is the first manifestation of the data center with the nuclear reactor. And it's like, well, no, come on, guys, we were already on this like 2 years ago. TeraWolf was way ahead of the game. And then whatever Justin Orkney's doing with Standard Power, like in Ohio, like they've got similar plans. Like, it looks like they had pretty good foresight to start building these data center campuses well in advance of the broader public really starting to catch on. And I just saw another one. Where the hell was it?
Bitcoiners always ahead of the game here when it comes to
in Connecticut. Yeah, Connecticut, one of their reactors, they're talking about building a 300 megawatt data center behind the meter.
Nice.
Yeah. So this is
it's so good. It's so good.
Well, it makes sense because there's great security. You don't have to build the infrastructure. You save on a lot of delivery costs, and the power is there. So yeah, a big static data center plus like a modest size like flexible load center like the Bitcoin miners.
Yeah,
and that'll be like the perfect set. Like, because then you've got a lot more flexibility in your nuclear powers if you've got that type of load associated with it. Yeah, sorry, I keep talking, and because just the ideas keep coming. It's like, oh yeah,
well, this is why this is why we have you on, man. Because like you're a wealth of information, and I think for all the podcasts that are going on out there, Len and I do a show every week where we talk about Bitcoin economics, blah blah. It's fun, it's interesting, and I think it's important. But there's a lot of stuff that's going on the periphery, and nuclear, Bitcoin, grid management, and the way these things work together in an environment and during a time when there's demand for consistency, effectiveness, and price efficiency. this is important. And it's a big thing that we can really grab onto as a community and say, look, we got an answer for this. We've been working on it. We have proof of concept and we have proof of execution in a number of places around the world. Listen to us when we give you this information. So yeah, I mean, Ryan, it's always good to have you. Do you want to give a price prediction before you go? Or no, for the conference? But how many K by conference day? I gotta start asking all the guests that because I have another guest tomorrow who's not a Bitcoiner, so I won't be able to ask him. How many K by conference day?
Oh, we're gonna piss people off, and we're gonna go down to 50K because I've got stacking goals here. Like I would love another nice dip like that before we go off to crazy town. Like I'm not hopeful that we're gonna get it. Like the other week when it was like in Canadian dollars, because that's what I see it at. We're like in 95,000 or something. It
was almost 100K, or it did get to 100K.
It touched it, but like the other day, just before I got paid, it had dipped down to like 87, and then 2 hours before my paycheck hits, it's 93 again. You son of a bitch!
This is the nature of the game, buddy. It's the nature of the game.
Oh yeah, if you want it to do something, it'll keep you guessing. But
I love it. Ryan MacLeod, Nuclear Bitcoiner. Follow him, like his stuff, and until next time, everybody, we'll see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Are you a fan of the old school NHL 94 game on the Genesis or SNES? Why not check out my show, the NHL 94 podcast? From tournaments and tactics to the people who make up this community. Check it out wherever you listen to podcasts or find it on YouTube.